Hello and welcome. I am Prime Minister and you are watching Namaste World, your daily window into the biggest stories shaping India and the world. We begin in Moscow, where India and Russia reset strategic priorities as Jaishankar meets Sergei Lavrov in Russia. In South Asia, Modi's Bihar triumph reshapes India-US trade leverage amid rising agriculture and strategic stakes. Back in Europe, a chilling investigation reveals how wealthy Europeans allegedly paid to hunt civilians in Sarajevo, exposing a horrifying wartime secret. But the biggest news of the day, Bangladesh tribunal has sentenced ex-Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to death in absentia, intensifying political turmoil and straining ties with India. All that and more. Global flashpoints, power plays and stories that matter coming up in this edition of Namaste World. In a historic verdict, Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal has sentenced ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to death in absentia for ordering a brutal crackdown on last year's student-led protest, which led to regime change in Dhaka. Hasina, who has been living in exile in India since fleeing in August 2024, was also given a life sentence on separate crimes against humanity charges. In her first comment after the court sentence, she said, "The verdict announced against me have been made by a rigged tribunal established and presided over by an unelected government with no democratic mandate. They are biased and politically motivated. In their distasteful call for the death penalty, they reveal the brazen and murderous intent to extremist figure within the interim government to remove Bangladesh's last elected Prime Minister and to nullify the Awami League as a political force." Unquote. Her son, Sajeev Wajid, also said earlier that they will not appeal unless a democratically elected government, including the Awami League, takes power. The ruling delivered amid tight security and widespread protests in Dhaka ICT verdict comes just weeks before February's parliamentary elections, from which Hasina's Awami League has already been barred. With Hasina in India and Dhaka demanding her extradition, today's death sentence deepens the diplomatic freeze between New Delhi and Bangladesh's interim government, further straining already tense bilateral ties at a critical time. India and Russia are gearing up for a crucial diplomatic reset as External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar arrives in Moscow ahead of President Vladimir Putin's expected visit to New Delhi. With the major deals, strategic coordination, and shifting global dynamics on the table, will this high-stake meeting shape the next phase of India-Russia ties? Here is a report by Farhan Khan.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar is heading to Moscow for a high-profile visit that comes at a crucial time for India-Russia relations. His meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Monday, November 17th, will set the stage for a series of significant diplomatic engagements, including President Vladimir Putin's expected trip to New Delhi next month. The visit also coincides with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Heads of State Council meeting, where Jaishankar will represent India alongside an official delegation. According to Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova, Jaishankar and Lavrov will review the entire spectrum of political ties between the two countries. The agenda includes discussions on ongoing cooperation in defense, energy, trade and technology, along with an exchange of views on major regional and global issues. From the war in Ukraine to shifting power balances across Eurasia, both ministers are expected to navigate a crowded geopolitical landscape. Their dialogue will also cover joint work in multilateral platforms such as the SCO, BRICS, the United Nations, and G20. Spaces where India and Russia often find common ground despite broader international tensions. A key highlight of Jaishankar's Moscow visit will be the inauguration of 2 new Indian consulates. He is expected to virtually open one in Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan, and another in Yekaterinburg, an important industrial hub in the Urals. These cities are emerging as strategic centers for India's engagement with Russia, especially in fields like manufacturing, education, pharmaceuticals, and advanced technologies. Expanding India's diplomatic footprint in Russia signals New Delhi's intent to strengthen long-term economic and cultural ties, even as the global environment becomes more complex.
India and Russia have nurtured one of the steadiest relationships between major nations in current times, is now widely recognized. However, that did not automatically translate into significant economic cooperation. Our trade basket remains limited. Until recently, so did our trade volume. It may have grown in recent years, but then so too has the trade deficit. Both the diversification and balancing of trade now urgently mandate more strenuous efforts on our part. At the end of the day, they are essential, not just to reach higher trade targets, but even to sustain the existing ones. The answer here lies essentially in the complementary nature of our respective economies.
The timing of the visit is also linked to Vladimir Putin's scheduled arrival in New Delhi on 5th December for the Russia-India Forum's plenary session. The Kremlin has confirmed the trip, making it Putin's first visit to India since the war in Ukraine began. His last visit was in 2021. This upcoming meeting is expected to focus on boosting bilateral trade, enhancing energy cooperation, and deepening geopolitical coordination. India has remained one of Russia's most significant energy partners since the Ukraine conflict reshaped global oil flows, and both sides are expected to discuss long-term frameworks for this partnership. In October, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Putin spoke over the phone, reaffirming their commitment to what they call a special and privileged strategic partnership. The conversation underscored the resilience of the India-Russia relationship, even as both countries recalibrate their foreign policies to deal with global volatility. The continuity of diplomatic contact shows that New Delhi and Moscow are intent on keeping channels open, diversifying cooperation, and maintaining strategic autonomy. Jaishankar's trip, therefore, is not just a routine ministerial visit. It is part of a broader diplomatic choreography that will shape India-Russia engagement in the months ahead. With geopolitical alignments shifting rapidly, both nations appear keen to stabilize and upgrade a relationship that has deep historical roots and new strategic relevance. With Farhan Khan, Bureau Report, India Today Global.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's sweeping victory in the Bihar Assembly election 2025 has injected fresh momentum in India's trade stance with the United States. With Bihar's dominance as country's corn belt strengthening New Delhi's negotiating leverage, the long-stalled talks may finally shift. Could Bihar's corn power become Prime Minister Modi's secret trade weapon? Here is a report by Rudrashish Kanjilal.
A political landscape in India's Bihar is rippling far beyond Patna, straight into the negotiating rooms of Washington and New Delhi. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's sweeping victory in the Bihar Assembly election this year is not just a mandate, it is leverage. And that leverage could redraw the contours of the long-delayed US-India bilateral trade agreement. Bihar is India's corn belt, a powerhouse producer, and that matters because American negotiators have been pushing hard for a doorway into India's vast agricultural market. India, meanwhile, has held firm, guarding the interests of its farmers, its supply chains, and its political heartbeat, the rural voters. Now, analysts say Modi's thumping win gives the centre something precious: political room, space to make limited agriculture-related concessions without appearing soft at home. But the stakes are high. Indian exports to the US face tariffs that go as high as 50%, and despite months of negotiations, a fair trade deal remains stubbornly out of reach. The rhetoric, meanwhile, has been fiery. Back in September, US President Donald Trump doubled down, calling America's trade relationship with India one-sided.
Very well, but India has, you have to understand, for many years it was a one-sided relationship. Only now, since I came along, and because of the power that we have with tariffs, India was charging us tremendous tariffs, about the highest in the world. They were about the highest in the world, number one. And we therefore weren't doing much business with India, but they were doing business with us because we weren't charging them. Foolishly, we weren't charging them. So they would send in massive, everything they made, they'd send it in, pour it into our country. Therefore, it wouldn't be made here, which is a negative.
But behind the bombast, talks have continued. When Indian Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal visited Washington late in September, Indian officials privately acknowledged that fresh offers were made, one of them exploring corn purchases for ethanol production. Yet, despite softening tones, even Trump hinting at tariff relief, the deal remains stalled. Why? Because corn isn't just corn. According to S&P Global, 94% of American corn is genetically modified, and India bans GMO crop imports. That alone is a brick wall. Add to that India's tariff design, 15% duty up to 500,000 metric tons, 50% beyond it. Any attempt to ease these terms, S&P warns, raises dumping concerns, fears that cheap American imports could crush domestic farmers. And farmers are already uneasy. Local media in October reported rising discomfort across maize-growing communities over proposals to import US corn. Major state elections loom in West Bengal, Tamil Nadu and Kerala next year, with Uttar Pradesh in 2027. All states where farming lobbies are powerful, vocal and election-defining. In this landscape, projecting a pro-farmer, pro-India stance is not optional, it is survival. So where does this leave the trade deal? Somewhere between opportunity and caution. Modi's Bihar mandate gives the government momentum. Washington wants breakthroughs. Indian farmers want protection. And both countries want strategic ties to stay warm. Bureau Report, India Today Global.
Wealthy Europeans once flew into war-torn Sarajevo on weekend sniper safaris, paying staggering sums to shoot civilians trapped in the besieged city. 3 decades later, a chilling lawsuit in Milan is exposing horror long whispered about but never proven. As prosecutors dig deeper, could Europe finally confront its most grotesque war crime? Here is a report by Dibangita Datta.
Friday evenings, Trieste, Italy. Wealthy men board a flight to the hills above Sarajevo. By Monday morning, they're back at work. Businessmen, entrepreneurs, respectable citizens. Between Friday and Sunday, they hunted humans for sport. They called it a sniper safari. From 1992 to 1996, Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, endured the longest siege of a city in modern European history. Bosnian Serb forces surrounded the city, trapping hundreds of thousands of civilians. Snipers perched in the hills became instruments of terror. Over 11,000 people were killed, among them more than 1,000 children. But not all of those snipers were soldiers. In November 2025, Italian prosecutors opened an investigation into what may be the darkest secret of the Bosnian War, the sniper safaris. According to Al Jazeera, wealthy Europeans, gun enthusiasts, businessmen, even a plastic surgeon would fly to the mountains surrounding Sarajevo for a weekend of what they called hunting. But their prey was not animals, it was people. Former Bosnian intelligence officer Edin Subasic claims these tourists were given prize lists. Children cost the most, then men, then women. Elderly people could be killed free of charge. According to La Repubblica, they paid up to 100,000 euros in today's money for the privilege of murder. Survivors always knew. Weekends were especially deadly in Sarajevo. Residents called them the weekend Chetniks. According to Zemil Hodzic, founder of the Sniper Alley photo project, information about foreigners coming to shoot at civilians had been circulating throughout the siege. For 30 years, this truth was buried. Then Italian journalist Ezio Gavazzini refused to let it stay hidden. After reading about the safaris decades ago, a 2020 documentary reignited his pursuit. He spent years gathering evidence, tracking down witnesses, documenting names. In 2025, he and two lawyers filed a 17-page lawsuit with Milan prosecutors, charging unnamed Italians with murder aggravated by cruelty and despicable motives. 5 men have already been identified. Gavazzini told Italian media he's exposing a part of society that hides its truth under the carpet. Wealthy entrepreneurs with reputations who paid to kill defenseless civilians. After their weekend of killing, these men would fly back to their jobs, back to being seen as upstanding citizens. Italy has become the first country to investigate. The question now, will there finally be accountability for Europe's most grotesque war crime, the one committed for entertainment? With Debagna Datta, Bureau Report, India Today Global.
As we wrap up today's show, here is a quick look at the top stories making waves around the world. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman arrives at the White House for talks with President Donald Trump, seeking defense guarantees, nuclear cooperation, and advanced AI access as both nations attempt to reset strained ties. US President Donald Trump has urged Republicans to release all Jeffrey Epstein files, reversing his stance as bipartisan pressure grows and fresh disclosures reignite political tensions in Washington. Britain's Labour government is unveiling sweeping asylum reforms, introducing temporary refuge status and a 20-year wait for permanent settlement as it confronts rising migration pressures and political backlashes. And that brings us to the end of today's edition of Namaste World. From breakthroughs in technology and business to political developments and natural disasters, stay tuned as we bring you the latest updates, key developments, and more from New Delhi to New York. See you again tomorrow at the same time right here on Namaste World.